So all the way back in the day, Henry Ford, who's a deeply problematic person in many ways, but also did some really cool things. He had this persistent idea that he wanted to make sure that his factory workers could always afford to buy the cars they were making. And at a certain point, he gave his factory workers a raise to continue that thing. And his shareholders, one of whom had the last name of Dodge, sued because doing so would cut into their profit. And they wanted to stop Ford from doing that.
You mentioned corporate personhood, so that's where corporations are treated like people and giving money is considered speech. Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. We have a special guest today from Aurora Solar, and her name is Fox Swim. So welcome, Fox.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And so it's pretty cool that you work for Aurora Solar, and I think probably a good portion of the people that are listening know what Aurora Solar is to a certain degree. I'm sure you know what it is more than anybody else because you're working there as a solar industry researcher with data experience. And so a lot of people think of Aurora Solar, I guess, as a company that can help you like make a proposal or design a PV system or incorporate some LiDAR. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what Aurora Solar does.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of those things you say are true, but the conception of Aurora Solar is to make the solar design process as streamlined as possible. Like the story I was told when I joined Aurora was that Chris and Sam, our two founders, founded Aurora basically out of frustration after trying to do a PV project for a town in Africa. And it just took an excruciatingly long amount of time and required so much manual intervention that just didn't make sense based on all of the modern technology that we have access to. And so from that frustration grew this software tool that tries to make it as streamlined, as simple as possible, and to enable these conversations between solar installers and homeowners and to get as much factual information in the hands of the homeowner so they can make that decision and streamline the rest of it so it's not comes background things that happen instead of onerous bureaucratic hurdles to try to jump through.
Yeah, I've seen some older solar proposals from like back in the older days of solar, and it's just people writing things down or making up a Word document, throwing a spreadsheet into the mix. And there was a tool that was out there too that it seemed like everybody was using around the, 2008 era of solar called OnGrid. And it kind of disappeared. That it's not around. I think that the last time I looked, the website's still up. And I know the guys that were running it, it was Andy Black and Michael Bishop. And so I still keep in touch with Mike Bishop. He lives here in the Bay Area. And it just kind of faded out. And then I remembered for a while there was OnGrid and Clean Power Finance, and neither one of those companies are around. And it seems like Aurora is the big player in the industry that everybody's using, especially for residential solar. But I imagine probably some of the bigger companies use like internal software, but maybe Aurora is also working with some of the bigger companies. Is Aurora working with like some of the bigger companies, like the largest residential companies in the country, or how does that work?
I mean, I'm not sure that I can discuss exactly like who our customers are and who aren't, but we are certainly working with many of the largest residential installers, as well as we do also do work with commercial and some amount of utility scale installers as well. And like the Aurora value offering is that we do extremely precise simulation, which becomes problematic at like really large array sizes because, if you have like a grade leveled ground mount utility scale site, you don't really need to do like complicated shading analysis because you've controlled for all of the shading. So, you're probably going to use a different software tool. But yeah, we've engaged with a lot of the different players in the market. There are different large companies, especially software or hardware companies do have their own internal tools that they'll use. And we talk with them. Certainly we work with them because they want installers to be able to use their stuff in our software. And so we work with them as well to make sure that we're representing their hardware as accurately as possible.
Great. And I remember when Aurora bought Helioscope, or I guess it was a buy or a merge or what, I'm not sure exactly what the details are, but there are two different companies that were competing to some degree, I guess, but it seems like Helioscope was specializing in, bigger projects, I think. How's that going as far as, you've combined forces? You don't have to repeat things, I guess. Is it evolving into like one single interface, or are there two different interfaces? Do people subscribe to both at once?
There is definitely been a lot of convergent process and a lot of ability to, instead of you having to do the same work twice, to be able to do this both, to just be able to do it once and then merge it together. That said, like the needs for like a commercial project design versus a residential scale project design are pretty different in terms of everything from just like what is needed for permitting documentation and how long the projects take and things like that. And so right now there are not any plans to like merge them into one Aurora scope or Helia or whatever you want to call it type product. But certainly there is a lot of working together on the back end, and it is a fruitful collaboration.
Great. So it's two different subscriptions then, or is it one?
I am not remembering what the pricing plans are at the moment. I know we've changed it around a few times. I believe that it is two separate services, but it might be a single service, or there might be the options of two services, or like you can get one or the other or both.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so a lot of people probably are using like Aurora for the residential and Helioscope for the commercial. And you also mentioned there is some utility scale projects too, I guess, that Helioscope would be working with.
Yeah.
And how big are some of the bigger projects?
I mean, the biggest one that I've seen is something like five something megawatts, but I know that Helioscope's upper limit is, at least last time I checked, it was around 20, I think.
Sure.
And I would be shocked if we don't have users who are trying to push that limit.
Yeah, there's some big, crazy projects in China. I'm getting ready to go to the SNEC conference in China, and they're talking about like 10 gigawatts or something like in a project. And it's like crazy, crazy big, some of the things that they're doing over there. And I just kind of brought up the topic of China too. And there's a lot going on right now. Like, we're not going to release this podcast right now today, so things change. But how do you even deal with that? Like, the tariffs are changing all the time, and people have to price their systems, and the prices could change. That's complicated for everyone. And I guess people will just have to go in there and change their proposals around. Or what are you seeing happening at Aurora?
So, fortunately slash unfortunately, this is not the solar industry's first rodeo in terms of supply chain problems. And to my knowledge, the solar industry has had supply chain problems, honestly, since that boat got stuck sideways in the Suez Canal several
I
years
remember
ago.
that.
And
Yeah.
and I mean, it's led to a industry practice where there's a lot of stockpiling of resources, and like definitely the solar industry is not in any way trying to do same day logistics or anything crazy like that. Like there's a lot of stockpile, and that's meant that right now there is something of a pad that's insulating a lot of solar installers from the initial tariff shock. It's coming. And I know that different companies are all over scrambling, trying to figure out new supply chains, new sources, new resources, trying to figure out what this new world looks like. And yeah, it is punishingly hard to try to plan and to make purchase decisions when the decision makers at the top are capriciously shaking this Jenga tower for their own whims, basically. And that is unfortunately the state of play that we have right now. And I think there is a lot of anxiety, there is a lot of uncertainty, there is a lot of hopefulness too. I think there's like, if you're in the solar space, you are probably more of an optimistic kind of a person. And so I think people are doing what they can to navigate this system.
Yeah, and then there's other questions too, like some people are worried about the Inflation Reduction Act and tax credits and things like that. And I guess we just have to go with the flow. And we also know that solar is the least expensive electricity worldwide. So even though people are talking about, bringing back coal and all that kind of stuff, it's not going to come back that easy if it costs a lot more.
Yeah. And the economics are punishing in this particular regard in both ways of things, because you have to put a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of resources into reestablishing mines, reestablishing supply chains, reestablishing this whole infrastructure that has completely gone away for the coal industry.
Yep.
And reestablishing that is going to take a long time, and it's going to take longer than Trump is going to be in office. And that's just reality.
Yeah, even past the third term, just kidding. So another thing too is like there's all these different rate schedules. How do you keep up with that? It's like, do you know how many there are?
Oh, God.
I mean, it's like there's got to be like thousands, right?
Yeah, so I know there are currently in North America, there are something like 3,100-ish individual utilities. So these are bodies who are selling electricity to homeowners.
3,100, not rate schedules, but just utilities?
Just utilities, straight up. And like each utility is probably going to have at least, two or three residential schedules, sometimes significantly more, glaring at you, PG&E.
Yeah.
And honestly, PG&E is a really, really good target for ragging. And they've done a lot of things that deserve shame and scorn and they should be made fun of for. But their rate documentation is actually surprisingly sanely laid out. Like, you can download a single PDF and it will tell you all of the rate documentation line itemed out in exhaustive detail. Like, really, if I'm going to glare at somebody, I'm going to glare at like ComEd or Con Ed, the New York and Chicago utilities. Their rate documentation is spiderweb garbage. It's insane.
Yeah. And it's pretty difficult just for the professionals, let alone the customers, to understand all of this stuff. And then even in PG&E territory, where you could say both of us are in PG&E territory, except there's CCAs. So there's community choice aggregators, and that can also change things. And then we have grandfathered in rate schedules and, old things, new things. And it is complicated for people to understand and explain to their customers. And now I've heard new things about they're going to start perhaps having utility rates that change. Like they'll tell you what the rate's going to be tomorrow. So you could, know when to charge your car and what the sun's going to do and what the loads are going to do and how many air conditioners they expect people to turn on. So there's a whole lot out there that's really confusing for most people. And so I guess Aurora uses AI to help people deal with all this kind of stuff.
Oh God, no. Sorry, no. It's like, don't get me wrong. There are places where AI can be really helpful. And certainly Aurora is looking at integrating AI in sane ways to a workflow. But no, we actually work with data source providers and have the actual hard data for how all of the rate structures for all of these utility rate tariff documentations actually function. And one of the value propositions that Aurora has is that we're able to basically help the user describe to the homeowner exactly what is real. And like way back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, even a solar installer could back of the napkin, like what the solar export rate would be and what the general, like how much money you would make. And it would be reasonably accurate because the rates were not complicated. Now, rates are incredibly complicated and you need something like a tool like Aurora to actually be able to sanely be able to say, okay, so you have batteries. The batteries can do energy arbitrage. You're in PG&E territory, which has net metering, NEM3 export schedule, which has a whole bunch of different crazy sub-provisos and non-bypassable charges inside of it. And we're going to math all that together to figure out what exactly the sweet spot between the system is, what is your optimal system size, that it's not too expensive, that your time to payback is absurd, but it's also big enough that you can generate enough power to cover your own needs as well as export enough to pay for the system.
Yeah, I can't imagine how difficult it is to crunch all those numbers. You must have a lot of smart people there. Like my PV system that's on my roof, it's under a rate schedule through PG&E called E1XB. And pretty much it's a tiered rate schedule. So that means, it does change depending on how much electricity you have, but I get full credit for exporting. And so it's pretty easy to size that system because I'll know how many kilowatt hours I'll make in a month. And then I know how much credit I'll get. And so it's pretty easy. And now you have like time of use rate schedules and you get less money for exporting. and the sun's going down at a certain time, and you have like certain days where there's different peaks and, like peak rate and holidays and weekends. And then you have energy storage. And then what's the price of the energy storage and how efficient are the batteries? And then the real tricky one is you have weather and human behavior. So when people are going to charge their car, and when people are coming home from, summer break and the kids are in town and they're leaving the windows open. And it's almost like we've gone from a place where you can make a decision that's pretty much based on like what's going to happen, to like there's just so many more variables. And I would imagine too that if you had, let's just say 10 of the best solar designers in the world, they're going to come up with 10 different answers that might be different on how to size the system, which also can end up making it harder for the person to sell the system. Because like they might go get 3 different proposals from 3 different providers, people trying to sell a solar system. And if you go back 10 years, they would be kind of similar. It's like, oh, you're going to need a 3 kilowatt or a 4 kilowatt system, and it's going to offset this much. And now it's like you're going to need more PV, or you're going to need more battery, or, how they're going to figure it out. So it's going to just be more difficult, I think. But all the more reason that people are going to need to have good software.
Yeah. So as a side note, as someone who sounds like you're on the original NEM, have you heard about
NEM 1.0?
Yeah. Have you heard about AB 942, the change to a solar policy that's working its way through California's assembly?
The one where they want to ungrandfather me?
Yeah, that one.
Yep. Yeah, we just had Bernadette Del Chiaro speak at our big party for the NorCal Solar second annual 50th anniversary party. And yeah, she was talking about it. And I actually made a phone call yesterday about it, calling a senator and things like that. Yep.
Good. So yeah, just to give you and your viewers an update, or listeners an update, though I guess by the time anyone hears this, it'll probably be done. But tomorrow, April 30th, is the next committee hearing for that. And whether or not it passes then will mean if it goes to the assembly floor. So Aurora submitted a letter to the committee saying, please don't pass this. And definitely I'll be watching, and we'll figure out what the next steps are, and, keep fingers crossed that this bill dies in committee.
Yep. Yeah, they'll vote on it, and then there's all these different branches, and then I'm sure if it does pass, it'll be going to court, and there'll be, all the politicians that sell out will be trying to sell it out, and then there'll be, the good guys and the bad guys and all that, and hopefully the good people win. So, so even though that date will have already passed when people are listening to this, it'll still probably be in play for quite a while if it does pass, and hopefully it just doesn't pass.
Yeah, that's the simplest answer to this question of it gets shot down, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. And we can have one less thing on the looming crate of swords of Damocles hanging over this industry and nation.
Yeah, and the unfair part about it too is the people that are grandfathered in, they bought their systems when they were a lot more expensive, knowing that they would be grandfathered in. And then all of a sudden they take that away. It's sort of like breaking a contract.
It's 100% breaking a contract.
Yeah.
Like, you signed a contract, an interconnection agreement, which is a legally binding contract with PG&E for how the solar sellback relationship would work. And you almost certainly, or if you signed a loan with someone to help offset the cost of that system, almost certainly that entity is not going to let you unilaterally change the terms of your loan agreement, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's extremely unfair and unwarranted too. The CPUC's math is creative, justifying this proposal at all.
Yeah, and so that's the CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission. And who appoints these people?
Gavin Newsom.
Oh, yeah, the governor.
The governor, yeah.
So people in California are rather upset with their governor, who's also maybe one of the front runners to run for president. So we've got that there too.
I mean, I don't know if he's a front runner anymore. He seems to
Mm.
have taken off running in the opposite direction. And people like Nate Silver and whatnot are very down on his actual ascendancy to presidency,
Hmm.
which, I'm not unhappy with as a person in California who is unhappy. And like, just to give the full through line here, like, this is definitely his fingerprints are all over this proposal. Last year, he wrote an executive order directing the CPUC to compile the report that resulted in AB 942.
Yeah. So if you're listening, Mr. Newsom, change your ways.
Yes, please.
You got to help out the solar industry. And then we had Governor Schwarzenegger that was a big friend of the solar industry. So that was also kind of interesting, even though I think when Bernadette Del Chiaro was speaking, she was talking about how she talked him into it. So
It's almost like the two-party system is not a great, and sort of this red versus blue narrative that we have is not really a great way to encapsulate the broader political realities in America.
yeah, I know it's unfortunate. And there's people that are selling out all over the political spectrum. I always just thought that paying a politician with a campaign contribution, to me, I know that's the way that you have to do it to get elected, but to me, that's like bribing. It's like
Mhm.
legalized bribery.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Hmm. And
Legalized virtuous graft, I believe, is what
yeah.
I've heard it called.
Yeah, so like I can't see how like you give a check to a politician and don't expect them to do something for you, especially the big checks.
Hmm.
Like maybe not just some little, $50 Act Blue contribution or something like that, but those people that are given the big bucks.
People and also like people, from corporate personhood, this idea. Like we have a lot of
Hmm.
corporations who are making these donations as people.
I know it's kind of crazy in a lot of ways that corporations have all these rights like people do, but then they can't go to jail, you know? So
Hmm.
let's put a corporation in jail. Like, how would you go about that? And even myself, I have a corporation and it gives me protections. And sometimes it's not fair. Like, my corporation could owe somebody a whole bunch of money if I did some bad business dealings. And then my corporation could just go, oh, file for bankruptcy. And then all of a sudden, I'm okay. But if it was me, I would be in trouble. So,
Hmm.
it would ruin my credit rating if I did some of that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
so a lot of people protect themselves behind corporations, but, it's the way that the system is set up. So,
And I mean, it's an interesting tool set, and I do think there is a positive uses for it. I think the unjust to me part is that it's not widely available. There's almost like two classes, the people who have access to the ability to incorporate, to use this corporate tax structures and legal avoidance structures to be able to shield when they take risks, and people who don't.
mhm.
And that's the world that we live in. And you're right, it is unfair.
Yep. And I've seen too, like not even necessarily in the solar industry, but sometimes there's a corporation that's even doing okay and it has a lot of assets. And then some CEO comes in there, liquidates all the assets, gives himself a big paycheck, and then the corporation goes under.
Hmm.
So I think that's just happened for my daughter's an artist,
Hmm.
a 10-year-old artist. And we were going to the fabric store and we went to Joann's Fabrics. And that's kind of what happened over there is they just decided to liquidate it, make a bunch of money and go out of business. And I was working for a company a while ago too that was called Solar Universe. They were doing franchising for solar and it was all going pretty good and stuff. And then they
Hmm.
got some new CEO in there and they turned it into, it seemed like a call center. And then, of course, they went under and they owe a bunch of people money and they owe me $400, 400 and something dollars.
Hmm.
But I know that other people, they owe like a lot more money, like $100,000 and things like that, some of these solar installation companies. So kind of unfortunate.
We call these vulture capitalists instead of
Yeah.
venture capitalists. I mean, and like my spouse was devastated by the Joann's closure. Like they used to sell sewing machines and they used to like they're like a very one big crafty person always making stuff. And so that's just devastating. And really like there's a really old Supreme Court decision that I like to tell people about because not a lot of people know about it. And I feel that I want to change that, which is the Ford versus Dodge decision.
Hmm.
Are you familiar?
I am not.
So, all the way back in the day, Henry Ford, who's a deeply problematic person in many ways, but also did some really cool things. He had this persistent idea that he wanted to make sure that his factory workers could always afford to buy the cars they were making. And at a certain point, he gave his factory workers a raise to continue that thing. And his shareholders, one of whom had the last name of Dodge, sued because doing so would cut into their profit, and they wanted to stop Ford from doing that. And then went all the way to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ended up ruling in Dodge's favor and forcing Henry Ford to cancel or to not implement that pay increase. And basically, that's the underpinnings of shareholder supremacy. And so basically, what that means is ultimately the whole century makes a lot of sense, because really what we're looking at is a world where you have this investor class of individuals who are ultimately the ones that every single corporation is designed and must legally satisfy. And if these shareholders believe that a corporation isn't making money fast enough, or if a corporation is doing something that they don't like, they can just cancel it. And so, like, CEOs get a lot of hate, often justified, for acting in amoral and unethical ways. But in a lot of ways, CEOs are less the decision maker and more the messenger from the investor class. They don't have the ability to go against that line must go up forever mentality. And I bring this up also because, like, it's sort of transitioning into, like, talking about the energy space. Like, this is an infrastructure based space. We should be looking at designing infrastructure and systems that last a century. That we should be designing these, we should be hardening them from weather events, hardening them from climate change. And that's ultimately what is the best business decision for companies like PG&E and SC&E and et cetera to be making. But that's not the short-term profitable decision to make. And so, like, as much as I like to rag on PG&E or SCE or whatever, I do heartily believe that most of the people who work there are competent individuals who want to do right by the people, by their customers in their job, but they're tied by this very onerous structure hanging over our entire society that everything must serve the shareholders' continued rise in value and wealth.
Wow. That Ford versus Dodge, that sounds like, I think they should go back and re-argue it. Does it still stand?
Yeah, it still stands. Shareholder supremacy has been the law of the land for, I think, over 100 years now.
So wouldn't there be like a shareholder vote or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, like, the mechanics of it have changed, and I mean, it works depending on how the boards are incorporated and things like that. But ultimately, like, the board of directors for, like, the C-suite at a company serves at the pleasure of the board of shareholders. The shareholders can remove the CEO. The shareholders can veto changes. Now, obviously, shareholders generally, like, aren't mucking around in, like, smaller decisions within a company, but, like, if a decision is made that they don't like, they can say, this violates shareholder supremacy, this violates your legal obligation to make a return on profit to us. And that is supreme over your right to operate your company as you please.
I would think in that case with Ford versus Dodge, Ford could have argued that it's good for profits because you have happy employees, you have more customers because your employees are buying your cars, they take better pride in their work. There could all be all these reasons why this legislated greed would even give you a reason to give them a raise. So yeah, it just seems kind of nuts.
Yeah, I agree. And, like, I would love to see it re-argued, or I would love to see, you know, some sort of legislative change that just, like, legislatively overturns Ford versus Dodge. And, you know, maybe someday, when we have a saner representation in Congress and in the presidency, we can actually, that can happen.
Yeah, I'd like them to overturn Citizens United while we're at it.
Yeah, that too.
And you mentioned corporate personhood. So that's where corporations are treated like people and giving money is considered speech. Pretty soon, what, are corporations going to be able to vote? You know, I mean, in a way, I guess they are if they can just give unlimited amounts of money and call it speech because of corporate personhood. And another thing too is, what about B Corps? So there's something called a benefit corporation. Patagonia's real famous for having the benefit corporation. And does that mean that maybe there's not publicly listed B Corps? Or I'm wondering if there are, like if I could go buy stock in a B Corp.
I don't actually know. Can B Corps? My understanding is that B Corps are only private companies. I don't know. It does actually say there are some public B Corps out there. I mean, and that's the thing, like, it's one of those things, like, there is sort of the other side of this is if you buy into a company, and also, like, you can have a public company, but so long as the controlling interest of the shares are okay with what the company's doing, then, you're good. And so, like, in one regard, there is, it's not just any schmuck can walk in and say, hey, I have a share, do what I say. You have to be able to have enough shares to be able to have voice.
Well, yep, they need to get us on the Supreme Court. So if you're listening out there, presidents, future presidents, we're ready, right? You ready, Fox?
I don't know. That seems like a little bit too much responsibility for me, but maybe. I don't know. I think it looked good in a black robe.
Yeah. And we're going to overturn Citizens United and Ford versus Dodge and, make this world a better place for everyone. We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. So let's see, some other things that I was wondering about is, how's the evolution going from mostly solar proposals were just, it was about solar. Then you got to add storage. Then maybe you add electric vehicles. Then maybe you add bidirectional electric vehicles. And then there's these things called virtual power plants. How is that getting incorporated?
I mean, slowly and steadily, I think is the answer. Like, there's definitely a culture and a desire to do it correctly as opposed to do it quickly. And like, there's definitely a push and a pull of, well, but we need to have this now. We need to sell this now versus the complexities. And that's the complexities of the product development cycle. And also, the tyranny of the three principles of engineering. But, you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, or you can have it well. You'll need to pick two, though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is certainly like we are keeping abreast of the innovations in the space. And there's a lot of positive innovations. There's also a lot of negative innovations. Like, bureaucracy is an unbounded principle, and both utility companies and legal jurisdictions are always figuring out new ways to try to charge people money and make solar less affordable. Like, we were talking about California, but also there's some new stuff going on in Texas. Yesterday, I just found about a new bill that's advancing through the Minnesota legislature that would significantly dampen solar installations in Minnesota. And it's constantly like, we have to be able to understand them and be able to represent what's true. So it's simultaneously, it's like, I don't like this new policy, but I have to be able to understand it enough because I don't like it, but I'm not a person on the ground trying to sell solar panels in that jurisdiction. And so I want to make sure that people in that space can present what's true to prospective homeowners, and then they can use that information to try to make the sale.
Like, I would think that Aurora, with all your software expertise and designing all these programs and rate schedules, and like when you're designing a project, you would also be good at, like, after the project is installed, helping coordinate, importing, exporting, all that kind of stuff. Are there any plans to do things like that, to get involved with the complicated systems that will figure out, like, say, for instance, when to charge the batteries, when to export, that kind of stuff? It seems like you're sitting in a good position for that.
Yeah. And so, like, I've been in the room with some theoretical conversations about, is this a space that we want to step into or not? One of the complexities there is, like, each of these batteries, each of these power control systems are like very complicated combinations of hardware and software and monitoring and instrumentation and things like that. And they do a pretty good job of doing the thing that they're supposed to do on the ground. And one of the things that Aurora does is remain hardware agnostic. One of the things that we want to make sure that we're not preferentially supporting somebody's hardware over somebody else's, because we want to be a platform for the entire industry, not pigeonhole ourselves into, oh, we're only, servicing, I don't know, Enphase, or just to pick a installer or a manufacturer out of my head. And like we definitely we work with these companies, especially because a lot of these companies have like preferred installer networks and like their own distributor supply networks and things like that. And like so we help them with engagement with their preferred manufacturers and things like that. But that's kind of a step beyond. And like obviously I'm not in the role of the ones who's making the decision. Crossing the boundary between software and hardware interface, though, introduces an additional level of complexity in software and hardware design. Because right now we are a purely software solution. On our software, we've designed our software. It can run on a MacBook, it can run on an iPad, it can run on an Android phone, it can run on various other types of technology. But to design it so you can plug it into an inverter and it's able to talk to that inverter and the inverter can talk to it, adds an incredible level of complexity that would be difficult to continue to do. Because once you start doing something, you have to keep doing that something.
Yeah. Because it seems like you are in a good position to where you could do something like that. Just one reason, like you said, that you don't want to pick a favorite as far as like, Enphase, Solar Edge, Briggs and Stratton, or Solarc, all of those different companies that are, all great companies. And so since you're friends with all of them and they want you to sell their products, there might be some way to get them all to come together. So it can all work together, because it does get confusing for people and the grid and all that. There's just like so many different languages. And how do all these things work together? We just did our NorCal Solar event over at Port Labs in Oakland, and there's somebody there that's actually designing ways to make different inverters talk to each other and things like that. So you could use different things together. But I can see in the future, I'm sure it's going to happen, we're going to have this networked grid where everything is going to be smart. Even, like it's not just that it's going to be your sources, but it's also going to be your loads. It's going to be your oven, your dishwasher, your heat pump, and everything coordinating together, and not even just your house, but also coordinating with your block and your transformer. And it's going to be really tricky to get all this stuff to work together. But I think that it's going to be the hugest thing in the future. I don't know. That's what I think. Sort of like a lot of people are calling some of this like virtual power plants and things like that, VPPs. But there's going to be a lot there, and you already have all the data and the rate schedules. And so even if you're not the one spearheading it, maybe Aurora could be involved.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly there's a place for us to be involved in a world like that. And I mean, like, that is the world that ultimately I think we do need to move to. Like, right now, the utility grid that we live in is very much based on the older centralized power production and distribution model. And utility companies are, especially the larger ones, are very invested in that remaining. That's why, like, you'll see companies like PG&E or what have you, or let's go pick on the TVA for a little bit. They're really, really...
Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yeah, the Tennessee Valley Authority is really negative towards solar, and like at the same time they're negative towards distributed residential solar. They're putting in their own solar and wind production, which they wind until very recently. I guess Trump is saving all the wind for himself, but they want to maintain the centralized power distribution, and they don't want to move to a distributed distribution system, even though that's what makes more sense as we look to the future of climate disruption and predictable, unpredictable events that cause damage to the grid that needs to be repaired. And yeah, these smart grid and microgrid type solutions are coming because they make economic sense, and they're going to make infrastructural sense the further we move into this new century.
Great. So I noticed that Aurora is doing stuff in Europe. So how's that going? I'm getting ready to go there.
Yeah, it's going pretty well, actually. Like the European market has its own complexities and its own foibles and its own,
Rate schedules?
yeah, well, yeah, it's its own rate schedule, its own structures. I've joked before, this is like you can almost put the documentation of the different solar regulatory documentation like next to each other. And even if it's all translated into English and it doesn't say, like, I could probably pick out which one is which just based on like cultural stereotypes. But it's going. It's just certainly Europe has been having a lot of forcing functions that have been pushing them hard towards solar. This looming threat of Russia and the shutdown of natural gas embargo from Russia to Europe has been a boon to the solar industry as well as energy efficiency industries in Europe. And we've been capitalizing on that to help grow that build out as quickly as Europe can.
Great, great. Yeah, I'm getting ready to go to Munich, and that's the big European solar conference. It's called either Intersolar or the Smarter E, because Intersolar is just for solar, and the Smarter E includes energy storage and electric vehicles. So I still like to call it Intersolar because that's what it's always been called historically. And I'm also on the award committee for outstanding projects. And so I've been on the jury, I think, for 9 years now, helping give companies awards for their outstanding projects. And it's always a lot of fun to go to Intersolar Munich. So people ought to go and check that out. And I think, did I see somewhere that Aurora has a booth there or something like that?
I believe that we do. Yeah, I believe that we have a team in Europe, and honestly, I'd be surprised if they weren't there.
Yeah. I'll have to stop by and tell them that I know you now.
Sounds good. Well, they definitely will know me because I work with them on the regular.
Great, great. Okay. And another thing too is like when somebody's first getting started in the solar industry and they might want to use Aurora's tools and things like that, but they don't have time to go through the learning curve. Can somebody hire somebody to do proposals for them?
I don't think so. Or rather, I think that we do not allow proposal reselling.
Okay. All right. And let's see, what else is going on? Anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, what else do we got going on in the world? I guess something that's been on my radar that I think you and your listeners probably find interesting is I'm noticing there has been an interesting positive impact of the tariffs, which is I've noticed that there has been a sudden increase in new solar technology rollout, that a lot of these Gen 3 solar technologies that have been kind of on the margins, that like they're a viable technology, but they're a little bit more expensive than silicon. The market isn't quite ready for them yet. But with these, especially with the tariffs on semiconductor polysilicon, and tariffs just in general trying to onshore as much solar manufacturing as possible, we're suddenly getting into a space where one, the solar industry is going to have to compete with the semiconductor chip manufacturing industry for the raw polysilicon. And that's not a value proposition that I think that, or a competition that I think that the solar industry is necessarily going to be able to win, because just the value proposition for chips is a lot. The cost is, you can generate a lot more chips, but the same amount of polysilicon than you can a solar panel. So I'm noticing a lot of non-silicon based things like CAD-TELs or perovskites or organic solar, things like that, which are coming on, which don't involve silicon. And I'm actually really excited about that. Like, I think that these technologies, they're much more efficient. A lot of them are fully recyclable, which is nice. And it's going to push solar into the next generation in terms of technology. So that's pretty cool.
Great, great. One thing that I've noticed lately is I teach a lot of people how to get NABCEP credentials. And I've seen more salespeople lately. And I think some of it has to do with there's been a hard push against unethical salespeople. Like I was just at the NABCEP conference, and they had a speaker there that was a politician from Las Vegas area. He's very young, and he was talking about the solar bros and these people that came to his parents and they sold him something and they lied about it and all that kind of stuff. And so do you see a lot of that from your end? Because I know that the Aurora Solar is like a lot of people use to make sales proposals and things like that. And then do you ever have to like kick people out and not let them use your tool? Like if you hear that they've been doing unethical things or anything like that?
I mean, yeah. So I have a couple of thoughts though. First off, yes, there has been times where Aurora has, if we find out that there's unethical behavior, like that's a violation of our terms of service, and
Mm-hmm.
we will cancel accounts and boot
Yeah,
people
you
for that and
go.
things like that. Yeah, but also like I know that probably you've been made aware of this. Like we publish a yearly solar snapshot and like to sort of to keep a pulse check on the state of solar. And like one of the data points that we take a look at, especially that's been really interesting to me this year, is relates to trustworthiness. And like over the past several years, like trustworthiness has been a persistent problem for the solar industry across the United States. So I'm really heartened to hear that salespeople and that you're seeing NABCEP or at NABCEP that people are trying to get a handle on this because it is like we as a solar industry, we have to figure out how to solve this problem because like bad actors in the space will eventually poison the well for everybody else. And like I know just like not speaking of specifics, but I know that like in our product decisions and our design decisions, like we will take a look at new features that we're releasing and one of the questions that we ask is can someone use this like if a malicious actor gets their hand on this, can they use this feature to increase deception? And if the answer is yes, then we do what we can to mitigate that risk, or we don't release that feature. And I want to be able to say that that solves the problem in Aurora completely. I know, but grifter's going to grift. Certainly, someone could, I get rather, and more lies, damn lies, and statistics too. Like people can almost certainly misrepresent solar sellback using Aurora if they wanted to, but we do our best to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wager that we do better. I hope that we do better at it than our competitors, but I definitely know that at minimum we're on the same ground as our competitors in terms of that.
Yeah, it would be good too. Like one of the things that I always tell people is if they want to get solar is to make sure that the solar installer is NABCEP certified. And that's just like another good check and balance because you have a contract where they say that they will be ethical and you can boot them if they're not. So that's another really good check and balance.
And I mean, what I would say to people too is just if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
Like that's a line that goes, I think that's advice that goes all the way like back thousands of years. Like if it sounds too good to be true,
Like
it probably
free
is.
solar or something. Yeah.
Yeah, if your intuition is saying, wait, this true, you should listen to that. Like cognitively, your intuition is almost always right in situations where there's too many variables for you to consciously track. If your intuition says something and you ignore it, you're going to be wrong most of the time.
Great. Okay. Let's see. Is there anything else that you want to cover?
Not off the top of my head. Do you have anything?
I think we're great. Yeah. So how can people find you and find Aurora Solar and change their lives for the better?
Yeah, well, you can find Aurora Solar online at aurorasolar.com. You can reach out to any number of our wonderful salespeople, and they will be more than willing to talk with you and to get you set up with up-leveling your solar sales experience. If you send in support tickets or generally ask around, you'll probably end up getting something across my desk eventually, especially if you're asking more interesting questions. And if you frequent really nerdy Bay Area things, you'll probably run into me eventually.
All right. Well, I'll probably see you at some of those. I probably maybe already have.
It's quite possible.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast and listening to Fox Swim from Aurora Solar. Make sure to get yourself NABCEP certified. Go to solarsean.com where you can get your NABCEP PV Associate and your NABCEP PV Technical Sales training and get yourself certified. Woo!